It is my great pleasure as the co-program chair of the first Google WIE conference to introduce our keynote speaker. She is Megan Smith. She is the Vice President of Google X at Google Inc. Megan is an entrepreneur, a tech evangelist, an engineer, social change agent, and connector. She recently joined Google's advanced products team, Google X, where she was working on a range of products, including co-creating and hosting Solve for X, a forum to encourage and amplify technology-based moonshot thinking and collaboration. For 9 years before that, she oversaw Google's new business development team, managing early-stage partnerships, pilot explorations, and technology licensing, working closely with Google's engineering and product teams globally across all product areas. So she's very interdisciplinary. She led many of the company's early acquisitions, including Keyhole, Google Earth, Where2Tech, Google Maps, and Picasa. Megan also led the Google.org team transition to expand into engineering-based projects, including Google Crisis Response, Google for Nonprofits, Earth Outreach Engine, and increased employee engagement. Prior to joining Google in 2003, Megan was CEO and earlier COO of Planet Out, the leading LGBT online community, where the team broke through many barriers and partners closely with AOL, Yahoo, MSN, and other major web players. She also held roles at General Magic and Apple Japan. Over the years, Megan has contributed to a wide range of engineering projects, including an award-winning bicycle who designed, built, and raced a solar car, bicycle lock, space station construction program, solar cook stoves, and was a member of the MIT student team who designed, built, and raced a solar car 2,000 miles across the Australian outback. I should also mention that inspired my nerd girls because we built a solar car right after that. So thank you, Megan. She holds a bachelor's and master's degree in mechanical engineering from MIT, where she now serves on the board. She completed her master's thesis in the MIT Media Lab. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my greatest pleasure to introduce Megan Smith.
Hello, thank you. Cool, thanks. Hello, everybody. It's great to be here. I'm excited about this conference. What I love about our founders is they have a long history of thinking about diverse minds and making sure Google's a diverse place. And early on, I know a story. I came to Google when we were about 1,000 people, but in the very early days, I know of a story where I think the 20th resume was going across Larry's desk for, in his mind, you had another male engineer. He's like, where are the women? Where are the women? And he told the team if they didn't have a woman in the next 5, he would just stop hiring. So he really, there's a commitment here to have technical women and underrepresented minorities and everybody from all around the world in our teams. So it's great to have you guys here, and we really are happy to be partnering with Women in Engineering IEEE. So what I wanted to, I don't know if we have slides up here, there we go. What I wanted to do this morning was spend a little bit of time on what I see happening in the world and how I think we can all grab and be part of that and make that happen. And then tap into some topics around women and technology and things I think we need to do to get more people, not only make the people that we already have more visible, as well as get more people into the fields that we're working on. Some people have seen this, some people haven't. This is a picture of one of our engineers hooked up all the data centers at Google. This was a little while ago, but you could see sort of search traffic globally. And in a way, it's a proxy for seeing the internet. So various dots represent a certain amount of searching, and you can see language difference, so English, Spanish, Portuguese. So pretty much wherever there's electricity, and sort of people, you're seeing the internet. And I think that's pretty interesting to think about the impact of the network. One of the greatest things that happens along networks throughout history is social change. Whether it was through here the Silk Road, or in this case, I'm from Buffalo, New York, so I have a shout out to the Erie Canal here. Many people don't realize that the modern, or the abolitionist movement and suffrage and women's suffrage, many of those movements were very vibrant along the Erie Canal. And same with Silk Road, where people travel and interact with each other, new ideas come along and people start to work together to make social change. We saw that, of course, with Arab Spring, how the internet was used. In a way, if you think about it, things have become, because of the internet, more adjacent. Networks allow things to become more adjacent. In this case, people's point of view became more adjacent. They knew that others agreed with each other. And so you saw sort of Arab Spring, and some of this is Iran and Egypt, other movements that happened. This is a march in Colombia. It's happened twice. It's a march against the FARC. It's an anti-terrorist march, and it started from one Facebook group of 500,000 people. 12 million people have marched. Just an amazing change. What I love about the millennials is that they take it the whole other level, the digital natives. This is a conference that was organized a couple years ago and happens each year. It's the Alliance of Youth Movement Summit. So it's a best practices summit for change makers in their countries. Could you imagine if the Tiananmen Square kids could meet with the kids who are working on Burma, the kids who were all these countries, and really sharing best practices at a level that you would have never been able to do in history other than very distant meeting and reading books. So they're webcasting and working together. Another thing that's becoming adjacent is what's in people's head. We saw that with Wikipedia, of course, is sort of the best example of sharing our knowledge with each other and making that useful. This is a really cool invention that came out of a guy named Lalit in the Bangalore team. Only about 30% of the world is mapped. And so what he was working on is an idea called MapMaker, where you can put edits in. This is Lahore, Pakistan. Normally you go to many places in the emerging markets and developing world, you get a map with a line, but you know there's like 1 million people there. So how come I can't see this? Where's the metadata? And this allows the community there to draw for themselves their own mapping. So across 6 months, the people of Lahore, Pakistan put themselves on the map. So people's minds together with tools become able to act in ways that weren't possible before. This is actually the activity across that tool. There's all these places in the world. Mapping is essential for business. Mapping is essential for ambulances. Mapping is essential for all of our work. And then you overlay all kinds of things on top of that. One of my favorite things that's overlaid on top of mapping is Ushahidi, which is a crisis response tool using texting and other kind of data. But sometimes it's traffic information. I know we're going to have people joining us from 101, which I think is jammed, but that kind of stuff. Another thing that's happening is the computer scientists around the world and engineers are interconnecting. There's 18 million developers. We were lucky to go to Herat, Afghanistan, and meet these incredible students who are just graduating and founding 6 new companies and joining a tech incubator that was starting there about 80 miles from Iran. And just to see the culture of the techies globally, interconnecting. And once we physically met, we're digitally connected. They have done amazing things with these companies. And thinking about sort of that layer of the tech culture around the world coming together. Here's Khan. How many people have seen Khan Academy and watched? Yeah, it's incredible. Millions and millions of people participating with his content. The fact that one person can bring so much to everybody, and then other people can follow his lead. You know, effectively all world knowledge available online for free to everybody, and maybe some paid versions that are, you know, fancier, but just really the fundamentals being available for everybody. An amazing breakthrough of knowledge adjacency. I love this one. These are computer science high school teachers, and I think of them as a flash mob. They come together, CS for high school, they do a weekend program, and then all of a sudden, all the great activities they're doing with kids in their classes get cross-shared and shared in the way that Khan does. They can put their curriculums up online, they can put the videotapes online. We can change education from the entrepreneurial people. This is First Robotics. Do people know First Robotics? Yeah. This is the Nationals, and it's like Friday Night Lights. They have 20,000 kids completely on fire. I love this picture with all their costumes, you know, like Vikings and bumblebees and whoever's running around. But you can really change education. And I think the internet has played a big part in First Robotics of the teams being able to organize in the levels that they're at. Now thousands in the US and now starting to be all over the world. Including, I think every continent has First Robotics teams. This is an amazing internet breakthrough together with ideas. There's a group called Google Ideas. They gather people who would be sort of unexpected to gather. This is a group of former violent extremists. So people who were in gangs, say LA gang members, former white supremacists, former Al-Qaeda, former IRA, et cetera, who came together in a conference in Dublin, 50 formers with 20 survivors, and talking to each other of how did they get pulled into this? How as youth were they propagandized, and how did they get pulled into that? And how could they work together? Now there's a network of them. So one of the things that I notice in general around social change is the greatest change happens when the people who are doing the thing or having the thing or from the group step up, step forward to make the change, and others come to help. It's the combination, but the leadership has to come from within the group. And this is an incredible example of people who've done some pretty extremely terrible things, transforming themselves. We realized that amongst this group of 50 people, we probably had 500 years of prison time that these people had served in transforming eventually their lives. Here's another example of adjacency. This is the idea of data becoming adjacent. We didn't ever think about this, but when we started scanning all the books, who would have thought, of course, suddenly all the words that exist ever in all books are suddenly adjacent or searchable in a big database. And so this is New York Times was using if you go to ngrams.googlelabs.com, you can play with this tool, date ranges and languages, but you can query all the text. And this was the word women used in modern text, and it doesn't come to the modern women's rights movement into the late 60s and 70s when the word women starts to be used at scale in books. But you can look all different things in that. So cool idea of like what, as data becomes adjacent in the cloud, what are the kinds of things we're going to be able to see about ourselves. Environmental point of view. We were able to, on the Google Earth team, Rebecca Moore leads this team, was able to get the Landsat satellite imagery from the last 20 years and make it a live data set and begin to partner with incredible science organizations who have algorithmic analysis tools for Landsat imagery and other kinds of imagery. This is deforestation in an area of Brazil. It's 1975 to more recently 2001. If we're going to work on climate change and things across impacting our whole globe, we need the data sets. So for suddenly what our Earth has looked like across 20 years becomes available for us to analyze and calculate. So I bring up these examples because you guys are the engineers and the computer scientists. This is the kind of work, the kind of tools that you can grab hold of and build and really make huge impact in the world with these. You mentioned Solve for X. This is a forum that we've put online where people are just giving talks of moonshot ideas they have. They give, a problem in the world, a technology that seems like science fiction, but it's coming online. I think we'd apply it to something and how we're going to do sort of a radical solution for that. And so we created a forum, starting first with a physical event to get it started, but now online where people can post moonshot ideas to solve large world problems. It's an idea of adjacency, like people's really creative ideas become adjacent for pitching and feedback and really mixing it up and seeing if we can really solve some things. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about where the network is not, although it's coming. So I wanted to spin the globe around, and interestingly, when you come around on the Google map to Africa, you see just a total lack of being able to participate from the extraordinary talent here because the network is not here. It's not a time of day issue because you can see Europe up above with all the languages and all the activity. And you can see where there is connectivity, there's equal participation. But shockingly, as early as 2005, there were whole areas of the continent. For example, this right-hand side of the continent doesn't have an undersea cable. It's like outrageous. Whole countries not being connected. This cable ignores all of these countries. So here's all this talent kind of landlocked from conversations with all of us. Pretty depressing. The good news is that mobile is coming. Right now, it's really penetrated most of these countries. Lots of entrepreneurs from these countries have stepped up and got voice and texting going, and data is coming. The big issue with data over time has been it's all been satellite-based in most of these countries, which we wouldn't have Google if everybody had to access us through satellite. Nobody has that kind of money for that consumer level of interaction on the web. The good news is this is what it looks like now. So it's really accelerating. And I think one of the greatest changes we are going to see in the world is as the talent of Africa joins us in this global conversation. You already see things like the most advanced payment system in the world is in Kenya, M-Pesa. People are already entrepreneurs there doing really interesting work around corruption. This is truckers texting bribe and time delays across truck routes to just take back their society from people who are violating social trust. This amazing startup in Nairobi that does DJ training and full digital studio and hip-hop music and radio stations. You're starting to see these media companies that you see in San Francisco, New York, London, Paris, Berlin emerging in these countries and getting online. And also the nonprofits are changing. The NGOs are changing. Instead of people coming at the people driving in SUVs and helping, which helps, but it doesn't really help because it breaks the entrepreneurial fabric of that society. You want to instead find the entrepreneurs who are in this society, like Tabitha and Salim here. Tabitha was a registered nurse starting a clinic here, and Salim was running a small youth soccer program. Rai Barkat was a young man who just went and lived there and met them, and then brought the power of UNC, almost like angel investing like we do here in Silicon Valley, to help them do what they wanted to do. So it sort of changes the network of change within societies. So turning to women. So I blew up Erie Canal because the president, in his inaugural address yesterday, mentioned Seneca Falls, Selma, and Stonewall. And I don't know how many people know Seneca Falls. Yes, no? One. So Seneca Falls is a town on the Erie Canal. And it's a place in 1848 where a whole bunch of women and men gathered for the very first ever women's rights summit. And a woman named Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who had met Lucretia Mott in an abolitionist event conference in London where the women were kicked out from the lower conference and they met up in the galley and they were pissed off. They got together and they created the first ever convention, and they wrote this document called the Declaration of Sentiments, which I'll circulate. But it's an amazing document, and I think President Obama was bringing it up because it was the first articulation of the sentiments of beginning to call for women's rights. And I wanted to point these out for us as we look at technology, because the things they were pointing out, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men and women are created equal. She said she based it on Thomas Jefferson's initial work, Let Facts Submit of a Candid World. So it talks about property, but monopolizing nearly all the profitable employments from those, and she is permitted to follow. She receives scanty remuneration because you have all the bad jobs. Takes all the avenues of wealth and distinction, most honorable to himself. Theology, medicine, law, she is not allowed. He has denied her the facilities to go through education, so you couldn't go to university. I think back to 1848, which is not that long ago. And so these women got together and made this declaration, working to destroy her confidence. There was real apartheid, extreme apartheid. There still is in many countries, and there still is, even in our own country, a level, even in our own companies. So I wanted to kind of point this out since the president had, because I think it's important history, and I'll share that. But it points us sort of back to the network. This is along the Erie Canal that these women gathered, and they used the network in the day. My perspective is that to get more women in tech, there's three things that we need to do, and probably many others. And as we get into network, we'll think about it. Well, one of them is around visibility. I think that technical women are largely invisible. We're not really in the media. When there's conferences, we might be one person on the panel. I was just at the Pacific Telecoms Council conference luckily in Honolulu, and you just scan it. It's like all men. Every panel is men. And so even though we are 10 to 20% of this industry, we're just not as visible, and therefore sort of the situation continues to persist. The other thing that I think is really interesting is our historic contribution is not known. I was lucky to go to First Robotics this year, to that where I took those pictures of St. Louis, and I met Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and he gave me this wonderful children's book that he wrote. It's called What Color is My World? The Lost History of African American Inventors. And one of my greatest heroes is George Washington Carver, who saved the American South with figuring out, get us out of our monocrop culture, and really amazing innovation. But in U.S. History studies, you usually learn about one African American inventor, him. And then you don't learn very much about others. You learn about one woman inventor, one Native American inventor, and then all these men. And it's true that the men had, as you saw in the Declaration, of course, much more access. But they're here, and it's wonderful to look through this book and just see these incredible people and have them come back to life. The person who invented blood banking, I mean, the people are extraordinary in this book, really impressive. And I think there's a sort of a misnomer that women have not been here the whole time in tech. And we have been. Sometimes we're a member of the core team. We might not be the founder, but we're here. And the one that's most striking to me is Ada Lovelace, who was the inventor of programming. She thought of the idea with Charles Babbage, who made the first mechanical computer. She thought of the idea that you could program it that it could be, there could be an algorithm. So she's sort of the founder of symbolics. Nobody knows about her. So we were lucky to do a doodle on her birthday, and I love that she became in the top 10 rising worldwide Twitter searches for like hours and hours and hours. And I'm like, okay, she's up there with the Kardashians or something. But it was amazing. She's in purple here, just floating along, coming back out of history there. And here she is, kind of writing this idea. She was adapting someone's papers, and she added all these extra notes about how this could really be used, including music, which the doodle artist added sort of the iPods and Android devices out at the end with the tablets and music. But this is another example. Do people know Bletchley Park? There's a wonderful book, The Secret Life of Bletchley. This is where the Enigma codes were cracked during World War II by an astonishing technology and mathematics team. What's interesting about Bletchley Park is that it was half women and half men. It's amongst the most diverse teams, in a way, in the world. And so, here are the women running Colossus and doing that. And sometimes, I put this quote up here because sometimes you have to, in history, you have to go dig for stuff. So maybe the names that are listed from Bletchley Park were the men who were leading, but the women were there, and you can dig in. This one is Miss M. Rock is entirely the wrong grade. This was Dilly Knox working to get her more pay. She's actually 4th or 5th best of the whole Enigma staff. And, quote, as useful as some of the professors, I recommend she be put on the highest possible salary for anyone of her seniority. So maybe you dig to find Miss M. Rock and get her name out there. You have to dig into history to retell the stories properly. But I think we need to fix the historic record, even if it's at a percentage. We're here. We've been doing this forever. Women as a percentage of computer science in IBM, sort of the 80s time, like very much present. This one is really interesting to me. This is from a Wired article called The Right Stuff, Wrong Sex. How many people know there was an entire Apollo crew of women that were trained and ready to go? Yeah. So when we teach Apollo to our children, we need to teach about them and just mention at the time it wasn't fair. This is what I do with my boys. It wasn't fair for girls. It wasn't fair for different people. And so they didn't get to go, but they were qualified. In fact, in certain levels, more qualified. So it was like a mix of the classic stuff that you see. So visibility is very important, both historically and also there's a wonderful new series called Makers, which has come out. And it's taking in the top 10 sectors of society, politics, technology, media, etc. The top women leaders. Average is about 17 or 18%. And they're doing their backstories. This is a story of a leader in athletics, Catherine Switzer. She's a very famous marathoner. But this is her first official marathon. I love that Makers is telling not only their passion stories, but also their backstories and the challenges they have. And I wanted to share these photos because they're in the top 100 photos that changed the world in the 20th century. Catherine was a student at Syracuse and entered the Boston Marathon. No woman had ever formally entered and registered. People had jumped in and run, but she registered. And as she was running with her coach and her boyfriend. People were like, hey, there's a lady, and people got excited, and all of a sudden the press truck showed up, and they started to watch. Suddenly the truck stopped. This guy jumped off, and he ran straight at her, and he tried to rip her numbers off and yelled, get out of my race. He was the race director. So luckily her boyfriend was a big guy, and he hip checked him out. So that's good. But, there's a wonderful interview of her on makers.com. There's also going to be a long format documentary that PBS and AOL are sponsoring this, where she talks about how it got really quiet after that. And she said to her coach, I think his name's Arnie, Arnie, I don't know where you stand on all this, but I'm going to finish this race. And I guess I got you in a lot of trouble. And so, but if I don't finish this race, people are going to think women can't do this. And so he was more than fine with her going, and the two of them went on, and boyfriend, they finished. And she said that when they were getting to Syracuse, they pulled in to get some coffee, and they started to see the news. And it really was a very important story in the time. And I think that part of the visibility is also show these amazing people. And so this documentary is great because it's telling the stories not only of our stories, the background of the techies and the scientists, but also, Hillary Clinton's backstory and Katie Couric's backstory, and all these women that we know about them, but their leadership. Another visibility one is how we're represented in media. And the bias that is there. We were lucky to partner with Gina Davis, who's been doing extraordinary work in this area. She has a thing called See Jane, which is, you can be it if you see it. And what she's doing is, she noticed in all of kids' media that there were just a lot less girls. And people didn't really believe it. They're like, well, there's Dora, and there's the Scooby-Doo women, and there's lots of women. But then she said, let's count. So she partnered with some researchers at USC, and they counted, and it's 2 to 3 boys or men to 1 girl or woman. And so you can kind of see it in this picture. This is called Aliens in the Attic, and it's sort of classic, like all the boys do the work, and the little girl and the big sister's kind of off being a pain, and the little girl's cute. And then the boys get to have all these different characters. The Avengers, there's always 1 girl and lots of boys. And so the boys get to have multiple personalities. Girls get to be Barbie. If there's 2 girls, then maybe you get to be Velma and Daphne. But that's sort of like you don't have a lot of options and you don't see yourself. But the thing that's astounding in the research, it's shocking, is that 80% of the jobs held by characters were held by male characters. And of the 20% of the jobs, this is across the corpus of media that 11-year-olds and under, family and children's television, the jobs were no jobs in law, no jobs in science, no jobs in business for any women. And so if you're 3 years old, forget 7th grade math and girls. If you're 3 or 4 years old, you learn that that's not what you do. So boys will be boys, girls will be boys if they want to do these kinds of careers. So really important to get this right. Now, I saw this a little bit screen grab issue, but this is Pottery Barn. So in the catalog for Pottery Barn, the boy gets the microscope, and the girl with the butterflies, and the girl gets kind of some books and a little house. She doesn't get the microscope. I just think it's telling. Like, in fact, in MIT, it's half women and men, and the biology department is more women than men, but Pottery Barn hasn't figured that out yet. So there's bias everywhere, and we have to note that. And the data is there. So visibility is a big theme. And then I just have 2 other things that I think we should work on, and then we'll go to questions. The second is, this stuff's hard. It's been in our culture forever. We inherit it. It comes with us. There's so much bias. Like, to me now, when someone is pregnant, people are often angry with them if they won't say the gender of the baby before it's born because they can't figure out what present to buy it. So, we have a lot of bias, and it's systemic, and it's with us. And we've moved in most cultures out of very deep conscious bias. I think we're really in that unconscious bias. And so there's a lot of data now that shows why it's so important to have diverse mind teams. On boards, I think the company performance goes way up, and if you have the rule of 3, at least 3 women, which means more than 25% of your board typically is women. So working on these issues, and I don't have answers here. I just know we have a lot of research to do on ourselves, and it's a call to action. And the reason why I kind of preface with all the trends in the world is because we, the techies, could probably help mine this. Part of our work with Gina Davis is to try to do more video analysis of, rather than having grad students count, couldn't we just tag all the voices and figure out how much speaking time and do that kind of video analysis? One more thing on bias is just visuals matter. This is a really interesting study at Stanford. They had a bunch of students come to see if they were interested in computer science. In one room, they hung up this stuff. In the other room, they hung up this stuff. And it was really interesting, the perception that this was a boys' department or men's department versus this is a more neutral department. Really important stuff. Now, another bias thing, when you try out for a symphony, you have to try out behind a screen. And it's really changed the makeup of modern symphony orchestras. Now I think they're 30% women up from like 5 or 10%. And at one point they weren't getting the change until they made everyone take off their shoes, because they could hear the high heels difference, and it was just in us. It's in us. The bias is in us. And so we need to help ourselves get there. And then the last thing that I'd say, so visibility, debug our biases and iterate and test and figure out solutions. When we find the solutions, then let's amplify them. And I'll end with this example, which is amazing. Maria Klaw, I don't know, many people probably know her. She's the president of Harvey Mudd College, and she just took this issue on. And I think she took the computer science department here from in the teens to almost 40% women in 3 years. And so she did it with 4 main interventions. The first one was caring about it. The second one was really adapting the product. She found when she interviewed the young women that they weren't thinking of computer science as they thought of like it's like a trade, not something I should study like history. And so they thought they should go to university and study a major, not a trade. And so she was able to change the entry level of the class to make it more, a lot more information about why we're doing this, and then we code, rather than jump in and code. The other thing she did was she took them all to Grace Hopper, so they could see 4,000 computer science women. They're like, oh, women do this. And then last was evolving the culture, just so that there could still be that programmer-like challenge culture of like showing off, but also talking to some of the young men in the class and the RAs and everybody about also being more helpful to people that maybe people didn't program in high school and elementary school, and getting them to change their culture and making it cooler to help someone than to beat them, which was quite an interesting culture shift and really valuable for everyone. So I will end there and see if you guys have questions or thoughts or suggestions, and thanks again for being here. Any questions, thoughts? Yeah. Good.
You showed a slide on the visualization for the trends for the word women or woman.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate a little bit on what languages were used to
That
get the
particular
data?
slide, yeah, the New York Times did pull that data off of this tool. You just go to this tool, ngrams.googlelabs.com, and you can put in different words. This is women. They did 1800 to 2008 in English. Some kind of smoothing. I don't know what that is. But you can go. It's so interesting to look at that in different cultures and see when different movements were happening and when consciousness comes to people. Yeah. Okay.
Sure.
Thank you. Good morning. I had a question. You said when you started here at Google, there was about 1,000 employees, and I was just wanted to know the diversity of those 1,000 employees. And I didn't catch how many years ago, but also what is it today? And, can you boast a little bit if you had any, contributing to that?
Yeah, I think a couple things. We mostly match the percentage of graduation, sort of out of the different fields that we're looking for. So, for example, in the technical teams, if it's like in software engineering, I think it's in the teens that the graduation rates are. So we match, we may beat it a little bit. And then also in some of the more hardware related, it's a little higher, into the 20s. So all technical women in the 20s. Around sort of across the board, two things I think are sort of interesting about what we did. The teams there's always been an attention to broad diversity. Geo, like we have 50 tech centers all over the world, geo, women, men, different people of underrepresented races, backgrounds, different religions, points of view, age range. We did it in what we call like kind of a Googly way. That's our culture word. We have these ERGs, employee resource groups, who kind of stand on the shoulders of IBM and AT&T and others who have just done astoundingly great work there. We have 19 of them. They're self-created. I'm actually the exec rep for 4 of them. I have the Googler American Indian Network, Gagalers, which is LGBT Googlers and Friends, Veterans, VetNet, and together with Susan, Women at, which is all the women, both technical and across the company. But there's 19 of them, and when they form, they tend to first just be a community, for finding people who are like you, have similar backgrounds. Black Googlers Network, Hispanic Googlers Network, Asian Googlers Network, Indic Googlers. So there's so many different groups, Googlers with different abilities. They form community, and then they'll start to want help our recruiting teams with recruiting and do events and educate people about the community. Then they'll start working on advancement within the company and that kind of work. Then they'll start doing service work. It's like some of my favorite work that we do is the VetNet team doing all kinds of back to work initiatives with returning veterans. But we tend to volunteer with our skills. So they actually made a tool using docs for people to put in their experience in the military and help them translate it into what that should look like on a resume and all kinds of things around service and getting jobs, but using digital tools. And then they also start to impact the business. one thing we found was that a lot of minority-owned and women-owned businesses didn't have websites. And it would be good for Google to have people have those businesses. It would be good for them to have websites because their business do well. So it's a real win-win. And so do very directed outreach to those groups. And so you come to consciousness from that because you have those people in your team and because they have a form of organization where they're reaching out. So that's tended to be the way. So almost like entrepreneurial approach to that. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
I have
do
the map.
Oh, go. Sorry. I didn't see it.
So thank you for answering that question. That was my first question too. And I have a second question for you. So we used to say STEM. Now there's a new term, it's called STEAM.
Yay!
So how do you see it transform the impact of women getting into the tech field? It's not really tech, but A is tech too. Like I really enjoy the doodlers and the
Right.
stuff, like making the big impact for the business, high tech stuff.
The thing I'm most excited about in education in general is how it's transforming a little bit to become more individualized. And there's a recognition. We're seeing right now the biggest innovation is more in instruction. So that you maybe do more videos, say, for homework and do more hands-on online. But I think project time and hands-on collaborative stuff like FIRST Robotics, science fair, all this stuff is like, why did any of us become techies? Is because of the cool projects we worked on. And yes, we learned some history of science or history of engineering, but we got to build and make things. But I think specifically to your question, with kids, having them learn that they themselves are powerful and a maker in whatever thing that they like. If they like to write, then they make, a book. If they like to act, they make a play. If they like to build, they build. And I think it's a disservice to kids when they're really young, like elementary and middle school and even into high school, to track them too fast. Because a kid who might be really good at a play and making that might find out that there's a whole technical way that has to do with user interface and art, and maybe they're like amazing videographer and YouTube, maybe that's their technology, who knows. And so figuring out that, I tend to think the key is to try to understand what catches that kid. And the most important thing, I was lucky to take acoustics from Professor Bose, speaker guy. And he taught us on the last day. He did all this great, like he was the only professor who was also corporate. So he's like, watch out for golden handcuffs and these things. But he drew this curve and said, you guys are performers. You're in university. You're doing these things. You have to figure out what you're passionate about. If you do what you're passionate about, you're unstoppable. And so I think that's the most important thing with kids is get them all this stuff, but get their passion going. And so if whatever the entry point is, we have two boys. Our older son loves history. And so my path to science and math with him is through history. So we're going to learn about the people. We're going to learn about Galileo and the Inquisition and all this stuff that happened. And then we got a telescope and we're into optics. It works totally well, like completely. Whereas his little brother is like very engineering, from the get-go. So he wants the glass optics. And then you might be able to tell him about this guy named Galileo. So it's an inverted thing. And so each kid is different, but you can suck them into any topic if you know where their passion is and how to enter that topic. You can get them to anywhere, I think. So.
I'd like to thank Megan. If you have more questions, write them down. And later on, IEEE Magazine would love to interview you.
Okay, sure.
Maybe we can get those questions answered. But Megan, on behalf
And I'll be around some, so.
on behalf of IEEE,
Oh, thank you.
we'd like to thank you.
Thanks. Ah, thanks. Thank you very much. Yes.